towards the end of February, 20th of February, and we went down there and spoke to the existing squatters, who eventually sort of understood who we were and the implications of what their occupying our building were likely to be. And after a few days, the majority of them actually moved out, and they rang me to tell me that they had gone. But they did leave 2 of their colleagues in there, and of course, whether it's 2, whether it's 22, we have the same issues of getting the people out.
So those 2 guys in there, they were refusing to move?
Yeah, they had the same information that everybody else had about who we were, what we do, but they chose not to leave, and then others joined them.
How long was the property standing empty? How long has it been empty before they even entered the building?
It's an old tin tabernacle. It's really a building of local interest. It's long ceased to be anything to do with religious connotations, and obviously Samaritans, we don't have a religious connotation at all. But we've owned it for 40 years nearly, and we use it for information training days. But it's been empty and on the cards for redevelopment since 2012, January 2012.
Okay.
So it's 2 years now.
So now you've got it back, what are the plans now? How are you going to protect it?
Well, we've spent nearly 2 years getting the local community and residents on our side for the planned redevelopment. The intention is that for the first time in its history, the hall will be recreated a facsimile of its original self, but in modern day materials, looking identical to how it was when it was first built, but available for every local resident or community group to use, as well as a Samaritan School Centre and our operations to train and provide information days.
So, George, in this instance, some people decided to squat in a property that would actually hopefully be used within the community, you know, targeting the Samaritans. Don't you think that's a bit unfair?
I think it's clearly a regrettable case, but I think one needs to step back from this particular case and understand that hundreds of thousands of empty buildings are sitting unused in London alone, and over 1 million, I gather, nationwide, and that's because we've had ridiculous house price inflation for a number of decades. More and more people, as they struggle to find jobs, and we've got 85 people applying for 1 job at Poundland, more and more people are struggling to be able to find housing otherwise. It's increasingly difficult to get the housing benefits, and so there are a lot of people that are desperate, and it's important to understand that the right to squat, the fact that this is a civil issue, not a criminal one, goes back over 500 years. The idea that if people are desperate and a building is lying empty, people should be able to take shelter in that building. You know, shelter is a basic human right. Now, of course, this particular case is regrettable, but there are many cases where squatting has been a fantastic thing. For instance, the Free M Barnet Library that I was involved with in North London, where residents have done absolutely everything that you're meant to do to try and have a democratic impact. The people of Free M Barnet didn't want their library shut. This was part of a £1 billion privatisation by the Conservative Barnet Council, working with a huge company called Capita. The residents there had done pop-up libraries on the lawn outside. They'd done petitions, they'd done everything they could possibly do, and they were totally ignored by the council. It was only when they called in people from Occupy that shared that passion for keeping public buildings open, that they were able to get any response from the council. And to cut a long story short, the result of our being there for 3 months was that the library was then given back to the community and remains in community hands, rather than having been turned into a luxury development or whatever it was going to be. And there are other cases right now that you could have picked, such as the Middlesex University in North London, where the land there was given in perpetuity to be used as an educational facility. It sits on a 2,000-year-old woodland, and again, largely pensioners are opposing that happening.
George, you say all of this, you say
these are things happening right now that are very, very different stories about squatting, and were the law to be changed, that attempt to try and protect that building that largely is funded by pensions would be illegal.
There are many stories, likewise, where people have perhaps taken advantage of this law, and as Nigel was saying, there were some people who you're speaking of here, who do abide by the law, and they do actually respect property, but there are those who don't. It's really costing people, property owners, businesses, a lot of money.
I mean, I personally think that demonising a few people that are problematic, often who are in difficult circumstances themselves, demonising them in order to punish the vast majority of others who are engaging in that kind of activity for often very understandable and in many cases very laudable reasons, is missing the point.
Okay, well, Arthur, is this the case? Are we demonising people who are just actually caught out by not being able to get on the property ladder or to rent property in London?
Well, I don't see why someone should be able to go into someone else's property. It's not theirs, they don't own it, and yes, they might be in difficult circumstances, but it's not their property. So I don't think it's unreasonable at all.
John, is this the case? Arthur doesn't agree with what you guys are doing. There's no excuse whatsoever for squatting in people's property.
I think that's a very extreme position to take, actually. I think it's akin to saying that people should be refused healthcare if they haven't paid a certain amount of tax. I think, yeah, as George said, I think the right to shelter is a basic human right. We call ourselves a caring, civilised society, and yet we've got people literally dying on the streets, literally starving or freezing to death. I think if a building is empty, especially if a building is derelict, I don't see how anyone can defend not allowing people to just sleep there.
Let's remember also that house prices in this country are, according to the IMF, 20 or 30% too high. So we're in a ridiculous situation where very powerful economic interests increasingly are land banking houses, so they're buying up houses in such a way as inflates the price even further. So there are real victims here, and as I say, it's really important not to pick, the two people out of those many who say we won't leave, to focus on them to avoid the much bigger issue.
All right. Well, Arthur here, his company actually works trying to keep people like you guys out, just full stop. I mean, Arthur, tell us a bit more about what you guys do.
Yeah, we offer a very cost-effective solution, anti-squatting solution for vacant property, whereby we place key workers and young professionals to live in empty buildings, because the way the law is drafted, if a building is occupied, it can no longer be squatted.
And how's that working? Do you see a lot of changes since the residential laws changed last year?
Yes, I mean, 90% of the buildings we look after are commercial buildings, and after the law changed, the squatters started to target our clients' commercial buildings.
So is Nigel's story something you can recognise from people you're working with?
Absolutely. We are prevention, not cure. However, we are often called in once the squatters are evicted, and it can be very, very costly for the property owners. We've recently took a building in Kentish Town, and it cost the owner £20,000 in terms of legal fees and cost of removing the rubbish the squatters left behind.
Okay, so Nigel, you said this cost you £10,000 in total. What did that include, and what sort of precautions do you have to take as a result of this?
Well, it's legal fees, it's bailiff's fees, sheriff's office fees, it's the court fees, it's clearance fees, and it's the resecuring of the property afterwards. Add all of this lot up, plus the additional 2.5 months that we're now having to rent our temporary call centre accommodation. We're trying to raise almost £200,000 for the redevelopment of this property.
And it's taken away from that now?
And, well, this £10,000 equates to almost 40% of our annual income. We are a self-financing, independent, individual charity. We get no central funds. Each of the 205 branches of Samaritans raise their own funds of their own volition. We now have to get another, 10, 15, 20 of our volunteers walking, cycling, running, just to get back to zero.
Should you not get central funds, then maybe that would be the answer. But for charitable organisations that find themselves in this squeeze, why should they not get money from the government? I mean, the government seems prepared to give £375 billion in quantitative ease money at 0.25% to the big banks. Should they not provide that £10,000 for you guys? I mean, that would be very nice. A much better solution. Yeah. And bear in mind that organisations like yours are struggling more and more because the government has made it more and more difficult for pretty much every single vulnerable group. And if we do have another crash, by the way, and thousands or hundreds of thousands of people are shoved out of their homes, we're going to have that many more properties empty, that many more people trying to get into a housing system that simply can't accommodate them because we've had massive cuts there as well. This is a real issue that a lot of people probably see as something that's nothing to do with them, but if things go awry again, people who've put all their eggs in that housing basket, that this could happen.
Okay, George, well, let's just see what our viewers have been saying on this subject. We've been polling you all morning, just asking you if you think squatting is ever acceptable. Let's take a look at what you've been saying so far to that. Now, so far, 60% of you actually agrees with George here and say yes, squatting is acceptable, whereas 40% of you say no. We can break that down into our age groups. 16, 24-year-olds, it's 50-50 in regards to how you look at squatting and whether it's acceptable in the capital, whereas over 35-year-olds, 67% of you, the largest percentage of knowers say no, it's not acceptable. Arthur, are you surprised by that at all? More people think it is acceptable squatting?
I think in the younger generation, the statistics say that. They're obviously sitting at home, not working, watching your programme.
Is that all you think that is? There's nothing more? Some of the issues that George raised here, you don't think there's anything to do with that?
I think he has certain valid points, but I go back to my original point. If you can't go and take something, it's not yours.
But the whole property around housing, the issue of property around housing is an insane one. Like I said, the very forces that we have bailed out with hundreds of billions of our current and future money are the ones buying up the houses and inflating the house price. This is really something we need to look at, where we need to question what it is to have the property right over something. And it's no coincidence that young people, there are a million young people unemployed, the banks lend over 90% of their money for housing, there's virtually no investment in the productive economy, and young people see that there are no opportunities around. Like I said, that 85 people are applying for one job in Poundland. These are young people that understand that it's not as if people are just sitting around and that the jobs are just there. Yeah.
So, Nigel, can you sympathise with these guys then on that basis? Does it make your life a lot?
You can imagine, as Samaritans, we take calls. You know, the people that were occupying
So why
our...
did you leave them in there?
Because we couldn't. The place is completely unhealthy. It's uninhabitable. And last Friday was a real emotional roller coaster for me. To go in there and see those guys, human beings, just like you or I, nobody special, nobody individual, just human beings. Okay. And they were living in conditions that I wouldn't keep animals or slaughter cattle in.
Well, Nigel, Arthur, George and John, thank you so much for joining us. Now, our second debate today